2 years earlier. You can't be serious. Alexander Wolf swirled the whiskey in his crystal glass, a crooked smile forming as he stared down the three friends gathered around the VIP table on the most exclusive rooftop in Ashford, Connecticut. Claire Davidson? The shy little sommelier who blushes when someone orders a Bordeaux? 30 days, repeated Montgomery Price, sliding a napkin across the table with the rules scrawled in drunken handwriting. No using the Wolf name, no gifts over $500, no mentioning the hotels. Alexander laughed. A genuine carefree laugh, the laugh of a 32-year-old man who had never heard the word no and had no intention of learning its meaning anytime soon. That's not even a challenge. He raised his glass. His friends followed. To the easiest 30 days of my life. Present day. Ashford, Connecticut. Monday, 7:43 a.m. The coffee was still burning Alexander's tongue when the headline in the Ashford Business Journal detonated his morning like a fragmentation grenade. Claire Davidson, the sommelier who conquered Napa Valley, announces $80 million luxury resort in Ashford. The coffee stopped halfway between the cup and his mouth. He read it again, and again, as if the letters might rearrange themselves out of mercy. They didn't. Alexander set the mug down on the marble countertop of his penthouse and grabbed his phone. 4 missed calls from Montgomery, 2 from his attorney, a text from his mother that read only, "Have you seen it?" which, coming from Eleanor Wolf, was the emotional equivalent of a 5-alarm fire. He had seen it, and still couldn't process it. Claire Davidson. His Claire. The girl who smelled like lavender and could describe a Pinot Noir as though she were reciting poetry. The girl whose blue eyes went wide every time he showed up unannounced at the winery where she worked. The girl who found out about the bet, that goddamn bet, and vanished from Ashford without leaving so much as a shadow behind. 2 years. 2 years in which Alexander tried and failed spectacularly not to think about her. 2 years pretending the hollow ache in his chest was nothing more than acid reflux from too much scotch. 2 years telling himself what he'd felt was fleeting, a whim, a dopamine-fueled illusion born from the thrill of the chase. Except the thrill of the chase doesn't usually last 730 days. He tapped the article. The cover photo nearly made him drop the phone. Claire was unrecognizable, and at the same time, exactly as he remembered. The straight blonde hair now fell in precise layers over her shoulders, framing a face that had lost the softness of naivety and gained something infinitely more dangerous: confidence. She wore a burgundy blazer over a cream silk blouse, those blue eyes meeting the camera with the quiet intensity of a woman who no longer needed anyone's permission to walk into any room. The article was merciless in its details. After leaving Ashford, Claire had moved to Napa Valley, where in 18 months she'd become the most sought-after sommelier on the West Coast. Consulting for Michelin-starred restaurants, a column in Wine Spectator, a deal with an investment group out of San Francisco, and now, the coup de grace, a luxury wine resort in Ashford. 20 minutes from the Wolf Grand Hotel, 20 minutes from him. The phone rang. Montgomery. Alexander answered without a greeting. Tell me this is a joke. It's not a joke, Alex. And there's more. Montgomery's voice had that careful tone people use right before they inform you the plane is going down. Her investment partner? It's Dominic Ashcroft. The silence that followed could have frozen the entire Long Island Sound. Dominic Ashcroft. His former Yale classmate, his childhood rival. The man who had spent his whole life trying to be everything Alexander was, and who now, apparently, was standing right beside the only woman Alexander had ever let slip away. She's going to need approvals from City Hall, Alexander said, his jaw clenched tight. Environmental permits, local partnerships. She'll have to deal with half this town, and half this town answers to the Wolves. And what exactly are you planning to do with that information? Montgomery asked, cautious. Alexander went quiet. Through the panoramic glass of his penthouse, Ashford sprawled beneath him like a chessboard. The colonial rooftops, The river winding between hills gilded by autumn, the tower of the Wolf Grand Hotel gleaming under the morning sun. Somewhere down there, Claire Davidson was back. Stronger, more beautiful, and, without a doubt, more furious than ever. He should have felt concern. He should have called the lawyers, assembled a containment strategy, protected the family hotel's market share. But what Alexander Wolf felt, and this frightened him more than any competitor, more than any headline, more than ruin itself, was hope. "Monty," he said, his voice low, almost unrecognizable. "I need to see her. Alex, for the love of God." I didn't say it was going to be smart. I said I need to. He hung up. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass and closed his eyes. 30 days, he'd said, on that rooftop, with that arrogant smile and that expensive whiskey. What Alexander never told anyone, not Montgomery, not even the Mirror, was that he didn't need 30. He needed 7 to fall in love for real, and a single night to lose everything. 2 years earlier, day 23. Claire Davidson was not the kind of woman who believed in fairy tales, until Alexander Wolf made her live one. 23 days. That's all it took for him to dismantle every wall she had ever built. Not with money, not with the obvious glamour of his last name, but with the small things, the unbearable, devastating small things that no one had ever bothered to do for her before. On the 4th day, he showed up at the winery where she worked, carrying a dog-eared copy of the World Atlas of Wine, her favorite book, with handwritten notes in the margins, asking her to explain every chapter to him over dinner. On the 9th day, he sat through an entire 3-hour wine pairing she had organized for 12 guests, and when everyone left, he stayed behind to help her wash the glasses. On the 15th day, he kissed her for the first time under the oak tree behind the vineyard, and her hands were shaking so badly she had to press them against his chest just to steady herself. By day 20, Claire Davidson was irreversibly, catastrophically in love. She told herself to be careful. She told herself that men like Alexander Wolf didn't fall for women like her, women who drove 10-year-old Hondas and shared a 2-bedroom apartment with a co-worker and counted every dollar before ordering dessert. But every time doubt crept in, he would look at her with those green eyes and say something so disarmingly honest that the doubt would dissolve like sugar in warm wine. "I didn't expect you," he told her on night 21, his fingers tracing lazy circles on her bare shoulder in the dark. "I wasn't looking for this." She believed him. God help her, she believed every word. Day 23, the Ashford Yacht Club. 9:47 p.m. The charity gala was Montgomery Price's idea. 300 guests, open bar, a string quartet, and enough old money in the room to buy a small country. Claire had spent her entire paycheck on a navy blue dress she couldn't, and when Alexander saw her walk in, he stopped mid-sentence and just stared. And for one brief, shining moment, she felt like she belonged in his world. He introduced her to everyone. His hand never left the small of her back. He whispered in her ear that she was the most beautiful woman in the room, and she laughed and called him a liar. And he kissed her temple and said, "I have never been more honest in my..." At 9:47 p.m., Claire excused herself to find the restroom. She took the wrong corridor. The door to the private lounge was slightly open, just enough to let Montgomery's voice spill out into the hallway like poison. 23 days, and the man's still playing the part. I have to hand it to him. Alex commits to a bet. Laughter, 3, maybe 4 voices. "Did you see her dress? She probably saved up for a month." That was Fletcher Hale, whose family owned half the marina. "The sommelier from the little winery. What was the deal again?" 30 days. Montgomery again, his tone soaked in amusement. He had to seduce her without the name, without the money, without the hotels. Pure charm. And honestly, he's going to win with a week to spare. She looks at him like he invented the sun. Claire's hand found the wall. Her knees forgot how to work. "The question is," Fletcher continued, "what happens on day 31? Does he let her down easy, or does she just figure it out? Knowing Alex, he'll get bored by day 28. More laughter. The sound of glasses clinking. Claire didn't breathe. She couldn't. The hallway was spinning, the walls pressing in, the navy blue dress she couldn't afford suddenly feeling like a costume. Like the whole thing had been a performance, and she was the only one in the audience who didn't know the script. She pressed a hand over her mouth to keep the sob from escaping. And then she heard the one voice that destroyed her completely. "Gentlemen, are we talking about my greatest conquest?" Alexander, walking into the lounge from the opposite door, laughing, accepting a glass of champagne. "She's out there right now," Montgomery said, "looking for you like a lost puppy." Alexander raised his glass with a grin. "What can I say? I told you. Easiest 30 days of my life." The hallway tilted. Claire's vision blurred. She didn't scream. She didn't burst through the door. She didn't give him the satisfaction of a scene. Instead, she did something far worse, something that would haunt Alexander Wolf for 730 nights. She left, quietly, completely, without a single word. 11:22 p.m. Alexander found the navy blue dress folded neatly on the passenger seat of his car. No note, no message, no missed call. He called her 17 times. Each one went straight to voicemail. He drove to her apartment. The lights were off. Her roommate, a redhead named Georgia, opened the door in pajamas. Mascara streaked down her face. "She's gone, Alexander." "What do you mean, gone?" "I mean she packed a bag, called her mother, and left. She told me everything." Georgia's voice cracked, but her eyes were iron. The bet, the 30 days, the whole disgusting game. The ground opened beneath his feet. "Georgia, listen to me. It started as a bet, yes, but it changed. What I feel for her is real." Georgia laughed, a short, sharp, joyless sound. "That's what you're going to say? That it's real? You made her a punchline, Alexander. In front of your friends, in that club, in that world she was already terrified of not belonging to." She stepped back, hand on the door. "She heard you. She heard all of it. The easiest 30 days of your life. Ring a bell?" The door closed. Alexander stood on the porch for 11 minutes. He knew, because he counted every second. Day 24, 6:15 a.m. By dawn, Claire Davidson's phone number was disconnected. Her apartment was half empty. Her position at the winery had been resigned via a 2-line email sent at 3 a.m. Alexander drove to the winery anyway. He drove to her mother's house in New Haven. No one answered. He called every hotel, every bus station, every car rental agency within 100 miles. Nothing. Claire Davidson had erased herself from Ashford as cleanly and precisely as if she had never existed, and she had taken with her the only version of Alexander Wolf that had ever been worth a damn. He went back to the penthouse. He sat on the floor by the panoramic window. He stared at the town below. The napkin, Montgomery's napkin, the one with the rules of the bet, was still in his jacket pocket. He pulled it out, read it, and for the first time in his adult life, Alexander Wolf cried. Not because he lost the game, because he realized, far too late, that it had never been a game at all. Napa Valley, California. 6 months after Ashford. The first 3 months were ugly. Claire Davidson didn't rise from the ashes like a phoenix. She crawled out of the wreckage like a woman pulling herself from a car crash, slowly, painfully, with shaking hands and mascara she'd stopped bothering to wash off. She arrived in Napa Valley with a single suitcase, $1,100 in savings, and a chest cavity that felt like someone had scooped out everything warm and replaced it with wet cement. Her mother's cousin, a sturdy woman named Paulette, who ran a bed and breakfast on the edge of wine country, gave her the attic room and didn't ask questions. Claire repaid her by working the breakfast shift every morning at 5 a.m. and setting tables and pouring coffee for tourists with trembling hands and hollow eyes. She didn't eat properly for weeks. She lost 12 pounds she couldn't afford to lose. She stopped wearing anything that wasn't black. She flinched every time her phone buzzed. Even though she'd changed the number, Even though there was no possible way he could reach her, her body still braced for impact every single time. At night, alone in the attic with the slanted ceiling and the smell of old wood, she replayed it. Not the good parts. Those she had already locked away in a vault she intended to never open again. She replayed the hallway. Montgomery's voice. Fletcher's laughter. And then Alexander's, that careless, golden, devastating voice, calling her his greatest conquest. Calling her easy. She had loved him with everything she had. And everything she had wasn't even enough to make the bet interesting. Month 4. The turning point didn't arrive as an epiphany, it arrived as a Wednesday. Claire was restocking the wine cellar at Paulette's bed and breakfast, when a guest, a tall, silver-haired man, in an absurdly expensive linen shirt, wandered downstairs and asked if she could recommend something to pair with the salmon his wife was preparing. Claire looked at the bottles, and for the first time in months, something inside her moved. The salmon, is it grilled or poached? Grilled. With a lemon butter sauce. Then you want this. She reached for a bottle without hesitation. A cool climate Chardonnay from the Sonoma coast. She held it the way a violinist holds a bow, with precision and instinct and a kind of quiet authority that surprised even her. Bright acidity to cut through the butter, enough body to stand up to the char, and a mineral finish that will make the lemon sing. The man stared at her. Not at the bottle. At her. Young lady, where on earth did you train? Ashford, Connecticut, a small winery no one's ever heard of. Well, he said, taking the bottle, someone should have heard of you. His name was Leonard Calloway. He owned 4 restaurants in San Francisco, 2 of them Michelin-starred. By the end of the week, he had offered Claire a consulting position. She almost said no. The old Claire, the one who blushed at compliments and second-guessed every decision, whispered that she wasn't ready, wasn't qualified, wasn't enough. But the new Claire, the one forged in humiliation and silence and 3 a.m. grief, looked that whisper dead in the eye and said, "Watch me." Month 8. Leonard Calloway's flagship restaurant, Apricity, had struggled for 2 years to earn its 2nd Michelin star. 6 weeks after Claire redesigned the entire wine program, the star arrived. The San Francisco Chronicle ran a profile. The headline read, "The Sommelier Who Speaks in Flavors." Claire read it sitting on the floor of her new apartment, a studio in the Mission District that she paid for with her own money, every cent earned, every cent clean. And she didn't cry. She didn't celebrate. She folded the newspaper carefully, placed it on the kitchen counter, and poured herself a glass of the same cool climate Chardonnay she had recommended to Leonard in that cellar. She raised it to no one. "Not bad for a lost puppy," she said quietly. And then she got back to work. Month 12. By the end of her first year in Napa, Claire Davidson had become someone Ashford wouldn't recognize. It wasn't just the career, though the career was extraordinary. 3 more restaurant consultations, a monthly column in Wine Spectator that blended technical precision with a warmth and accessibility that made sommeliers and casual drinkers alike fall in love with her writing. An invitation to judge at the Napa Valley Wine Competition, where she was the youngest panelist by 15 years. It was her. She had learned to walk into rooms the way storms walk into coastlines, not asking for space, but simply occupying it. She cut her hair into precise, layered lines that framed her jaw like architecture. She traded the black mourning wardrobe for silhouettes that spoke quietly of money and taste. Ivory silk, burgundy cashmere, tailored blazers that fit her like declarations of intent. She started wearing heels not because she needed the height, but because she liked the sound they made against marble floors. A steady, unhurried rhythm that said, "I am here, and I am not leaving." She learned to hold eye contact 3 seconds longer than comfortable. She learned that silence, deployed correctly, was louder than any argument. She learned to say no without apology and yes without permission. Men noticed. Of course they noticed. A venture capitalist at a wine dinner asked for her number. She smiled and said she didn't mix grapes with business. A tech founder sent 36 roses to her apartment. She donated them to the hospital next door and sent him a thank you note recommending a decent rosé, since he clearly had romantic taste, but questionable wine taste. She didn't date. Not because she was broken. She had reassembled every piece of herself with ruthless patience, but because she had discovered something far more intoxicating than being wanted. She had discovered what it felt like to want herself. Month 18. The phone call that changed everything. I'm going to be direct with you, Claire. The voice on the other end belonged to Dominic Ashcroft, a name she'd heard once or twice in Alexander's orbit but never met in person. British accent, calm, deliberate cadence. The voice of a man who measured every word before spending it. I have a group of investors. We want to build a luxury wine resort on the East Coast, and every single person I've consulted has said the same name, yours. Claire leaned against her kitchen counter and stared out the window at the San Francisco skyline. Where on the East Coast? A pause, the kind of pause that carries weight. Ashford, Connecticut. Her stomach dropped. Her fingers tightened around the phone. For exactly 4 seconds, the old Claire resurfaced. The one who ran, the one who folded the navy dress and left it on a leather seat and disappeared into the night. 4 seconds. Then the new Claire stepped forward, the one with the layered hair and the steady heels and the column in Wine Spectator and the 2 Michelin stars she'd helped earn for restaurants that weren't even hers. Send me the proposal, she said. Her voice didn't waver. I'll be there in 2 weeks. She hung up, set the phone down, walked to the mirror in the hallway. The woman staring back at her was 25 years old, blonde, blue-eyed, and absolutely, terrifyingly ready. Claire Davidson was going home, not to run, not to hide, not to prove anything to Alexander Wolfe, to prove everything to herself. Present day, Ashford, Connecticut. Wednesday, 10 a.m. Claire Davidson walked into the Ashford Town Hall like she owned it, because, in a sense, she was about to. The heels came first. Ivory Louboutins clicking against the marble floor in that steady, unhurried rhythm she had perfected over 18 months of walking into rooms full of men who underestimated her. Then the blazer, structured, charcoal gray, tailored so precisely it could have been sewn directly onto her shoulders. The blonde hair catching the autumn light from the atrium windows. The blue eyes scanning the lobby with the calm efficiency of a general surveying a battlefield. Behind her, Dominic Ashcroft carried the blueprints and a leather portfolio. To her left, a young architect named Sarah Whitfield held a tablet with the full 3D rendering of the resort. And across the lobby, standing by the elevator as though he'd been waiting there since the Mesozoic era, was Alexander Wolfe. He looked exactly the same. That was the cruelest part. The dark hair pushed back carelessly. The jaw that could have been carved by a sculptor with a personal grudge against symmetry. The green eyes that had once made her forget her own name. He wore a navy suit without a tie, the top button undone, and he was holding a coffee cup he clearly had no intention of drinking. Their eyes met. Claire didn't flinch, didn't slow down, didn't speed up. She maintained the exact same pace, click, 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 as though he were a painting on the wall. Decorative, irrelevant. Claire. His voice was lower than she remembered. Rougher, like a man who hadn't slept properly in a long time. She stopped. Not for him, but because he was standing directly in her path, and walking through a human being, however satisfying, was not yet physically possible. Alexander. No warmth, no ice, just nothing. The flat, professional tone of a woman addressing a stranger whose name she happened to know. Excuse me, I have a meeting with the planning committee. I know, I'm on the planning committee. For the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Not fear, not anger, amusement. Of course you are, she said softly. Then she walked past him, close enough that he caught the scent of jasmine and white tea, a perfume he didn't recognize from a life he hadn't been part of, and disappeared into the elevator. Alexander stood there, coffee growing cold, heart hammering against his ribs like a prisoner demanding release. She hadn't yelled, hadn't cried, hadn't even looked at him with hatred. She had looked at him with nothing, and that was 1,000 times worse. The planning committee meeting, conference room B, 10:30 a.m. Claire's presentation was flawless. $80 million. A 60-room luxury resort with a vineyard, a world-class restaurant, a sommelier academy, and a spa designed to blend seamlessly into the Connecticut coastline. Sustainable architecture, local hiring, a projected economic impact of $12 million annually for the town of Ashford. She spoke without notes. She answered every question with the precision of a surgeon and the warmth of a storyteller. She made the committee laugh twice, not a dozen times, and lean forward in their seats, like children being told a bedtime story they never wanted to end. Alexander watched from the far end of the table, jaw tight, saying nothing. When it was over, the committee chair, a stout woman named Dolores Whitman, who had known the Wolfe family for 40 years, shook Claire's hand and said, "Ms. Davidson, I do believe Ashford has been waiting for someone like you." Claire smiled. Gracious, controlled, devastating. "Thank you, Dolores. Ashford has been on my mind for quite some time." She didn't look at Alexander when she said it. She didn't need to. The parking lot. 12:15 p.m. "You're not going to talk to me?" Alexander caught up with her by the town hall steps. His voice carried the careful restraint of a man holding a live grenade. Claire turned. The autumn wind moved her hair across her face, and she let it. Let the silence stretch. Let him stand there marinating in the discomfort of being ignored by someone who used to hang on his every word. "We just spent 90 minutes in the same room, Alexander. What else is there to say? Claire, I need you to know. You don't need me to know anything." Her voice was still calm, but her eyes had gone cold, the blue of a glacier, not a summer sky. What happened between us was a long time ago. I've moved on. I suggest you do the same. I never moved on. "That," she said, opening her car door, "is not my problem." She climbed into a matte black Range Rover that probably cost more than his first car and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. Ashford Harbor Restaurant, 8:00 p.m. The dinner with the investors was supposed to be business only. Dominic had booked a private room overlooking the harbor, and Claire was reviewing wine selections when a familiar voice froze her mid-sentence. "Claire Davidson. My God, it really is you." She looked up. The man standing in the doorway was tall, taller than Alexander, with sandy brown hair, a disarming smile, and eyes the color of warm honey. He wore his suit like an afterthought, sleeves slightly rolled, as though formality was something that happened to other people. Reese Kensington. She knew the name. She knew the face. She knew exactly where she had last seen him. At that rooftop table, 2 years ago, sitting beside Montgomery Price, while her entire life became a punchline. "Reese!" Her voice was steel wrapped in silk. "I didn't expect to see you here. I'm consulting on the resort's hospitality design. Dominic brought me in last week." He stepped closer, and something in his expression shifted. Something that looked dangerously close to shame. "Claire, I need to say something. And I need to say it now, before we pretend to talk about floor plans and thread counts." She crossed her arms. "Go ahead. I was there that night, at the yacht club. I heard everything, the bet, the laughter, all of it." He met her eyes without flinching. "And I said nothing. I laughed along because it was easier than being decent. I have thought about that silence every single day for 2 years, and I am not going to carry it into this room. I'm sorry, Claire. Not because you're successful now. Not because you're standing in front of me looking like you conquered the world. Because you deserved better that night, and I was too much of a coward to say so." The restaurant hummed around them. Glasses clinked. The harbor glittered. Claire studied him for a long, unreadable moment. Then she uncrossed her arms. "Sit down, Reese. We have a resort to build." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a door, cracked open, barely an inch, and Reese Kensington walked through it with the careful gratitude of a man who understood he didn't deserve it. 3 tables away, hidden behind a menu he wasn't reading, Alexander Wolf watched them sit down together, and felt, for the first time, what Claire must have felt in that hallway, the ground disappearing beneath his feet. 2 weeks later, Ashford, Connecticut. It started with wine. Not the polite, professional kind, the kind shared over blueprints and budget spreadsheets in Dominic's conference room. That came first, yes. But the wine that changed everything was a 2016 Willamette Valley Pinot Noir that Reese Kensington brought to the construction site on a Thursday evening, wrapped in brown paper like a secret, while Claire sat on an overturned crate watching the sun melt into the Connecticut coastline where her resort would stand. "Peace offering," he said, holding up the bottle. "Or bribery, depending on how the tasting goes." Claire looked at the label, then at him, then back at the label. "Willamette Valley, 2016. You did your homework. I read every one of your Wine Spectator columns on the flight from London. Twice." He sat down on the crate beside her, not too close, not too far, with the careful spatial awareness of a man who understood that trust, once broken, must be rebuilt 1 inch at a time. "You wrote that Oregon Pinot is the most honest wine in America, that it doesn't hide behind oak or alcohol, that it shows you exactly what it is and dares you to love it anyway." Claire said nothing for a moment. The wind carried the smell of salt and turned earth. "You memorized that?" "It stayed with me." He looked at her, not the way Alexander used to look at her, like she was a riddle he wanted to solve, but the way someone looks at a coastline they've traveled a long way to reach. With stillness, with patience, with the quiet understanding that some things cannot be rushed. "A lot of what you write stays with me, Claire." She opened the bottle. They shared it without glasses, passing it back and forth like teenagers, and for the first time in 2 years, Claire Davidson laughed, really laughed, without checking first to make sure it was safe. The following week, Reese Kensington did not pursue Claire. That was the difference, the tectonic, earth-splitting difference, and she felt it in her bones. He didn't send flowers, didn't manufacture excuses to touch her arm, didn't deploy compliments like chess moves calculated 3 turns ahead. Instead, he simply showed up. Every day at the construction site or the temporary office Dominic had rented downtown, Reese appeared with coffee or questions or a quiet willingness to carry whatever was heaviest: boxes, decisions, silences. He asked about her wine philosophy. He asked about Paulette's bed and breakfast. He asked about the 3 months in Napa she never talked about. The ugly ones, the ones before Leonard Calloway. And when she finally told him, sitting in the half-built lobby of her resort surrounded by sawdust and blueprints, his only response was, "I wish I had known you then. Not to fix anything, just so you wouldn't have been alone." Claire stared at him. A long, searching look. The kind she usually reserved for wines she couldn't quite identify, wines that surprised her, wines that revealed new layers the longer she held them on her palate. "You're not what I expected, Reese." "What did you expect?" "Another version of him." Reese held her gaze. "I was. That night at the yacht club, I absolutely was. The difference is that I decided I didn't want to be anymore." He paused. "Some people hear the worst version of themselves and lean into it. Others hear it and spend the rest of their lives trying to become someone else. I'd like to think I'm the second kind." Meanwhile, the Wolf Grand Hotel, Alexander's office. Alexander was unraveling. Not publicly. The wolf mask was far too well constructed for that. He still chaired board meetings, still approved hotel renovations, still shook hands with investors while flashing that effortless smile the business magazines loved to photograph. But behind the closed door of his corner office, the mask came off, and what remained was a man who looked like he hadn't slept since the Ashford Business Journal blew up his morning 3 weeks ago. He had tried everything. He sent Claire a handwritten letter. 6 pages, no lies. the closest thing to a confession his pride had ever allowed. It came back unopened, the Wolf Grand Hotel return address circled in red marker with a single word written beside it. No. He arranged a coincidental meeting at the only coffee shop she frequented. She saw him through the window, turned on her ivory Louboutins, and walked to the cafe 3 blocks further without breaking stride. He called Dominic Ashcroft to discuss a potential collaboration between the Wolf Grand Hotel and the new resort. Dominic listened politely for 4 minutes, then said, "Alexander, she has asked me in very clear terms to ensure that no Wolf-affiliated entity is involved in this project. I intend to honor that request." Each rejection was a brick, and Claire was building a wall so high and so elegant that it made the resort blueprints look like a children's sketch. But what truly destroyed Alexander, what kept him awake at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling with a glass of scotch he couldn't taste, was Reese. He saw them. The whole town saw them. Claire and Reese walking through the farmer's market on Saturday morning, her laughing at something he said while holding a bag of peaches. Claire and Reese at the harbor restaurant, heads bent over a shared dessert, the candlelight turning her hair to gold. Claire and Reese at the construction site, standing side by side watching the steel skeleton of the resort rise against the sky, their shoulders almost touching, the half-inch of space between them more intimate than any kiss. Alexander had known Reese Kensington since prep school. He had seen Reese charm women at cocktail parties, close deals over cigars, navigate boardrooms with that effortless British ease. But he had never, not once, seen Reese look at anyone the way he looked at Claire Davidson. Like she was the answer to a question he'd spent his whole life too afraid to ask. Montgomery noticed. Of course Montgomery noticed. "You need to let this go, Alex." They were sitting in Alexander's office. It was past midnight. The scotch was half empty. "I can't. She's moved on. She's building a goddamn resort. She's got Reese practically orbiting her like a satellite." "What exactly is your plan here?" "I don't have a plan." "That's terrifyingly obvious." Alexander set his glass down. His voice, when it came, was stripped of every layer of charm and arrogance and inherited confidence, bare as bone. "He was there, Monty. That night. Reese was at the table. He heard the bet. He laughed. He raised his glass. And now she's letting him in?" His jaw worked. "How is that fair?" Montgomery was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe," he said carefully. "It's not about who was at the table. Maybe it's about who had the courage to apologize first." The silence that followed was the loudest sound Alexander had ever heard, because Montgomery was right. Reese had apologized. Openly, immediately, without calculation or agenda. He had walked into that restaurant and laid his shame on the table like a man who understood that honesty, real honesty, the kind that cost something, was the only currency Claire Davidson would ever accept again. And Alexander had sent a letter. A letter. 6 pages of carefully constructed prose that probably read, to Claire, exactly like what it was. Another performance from a man who had already proven that performances were all he had. He picked up the scotch. Put it down. Picked it up again. "What do I do, Monty?" For the first time in 30 years of friendship, Montgomery Price had no answer. 5 weeks later. The Davidson Resort construction site. Friday, 6:47 p.m. The roof was finished. Claire stood on the 3rd-floor terrace of what would become the resort's grand tasting room, watching the last steel beam settle into place while the construction crew below erupted in applause. The Connecticut sky had turned the color of a ripe Grenache, deep amber bleeding into violet, and the coastline stretched beneath her like a promise she had finally kept. Reese appeared beside her. He always appeared. Never arrived, never announced himself, just materialized at her side as though the universe kept reserving that specific spot for him. "You built this," he said quietly. "We're not done yet." "I'm not talking about the building, Claire." She looked at him. The wind moved between them, carrying salt and sawdust, and the distant sound of the crew celebrating below. Reese was looking at the horizon, but his words were aimed directly at her chest. 2 years ago, you were standing in a hallway listening to the worst moment of your life, and now you're standing on top of something you created from nothing, something no one gave you, no one handed you, no one bet you couldn't do. He turned to face her, those honey-colored eyes, steady as oak. I have never admired anyone the way I admire you, and I need you to know that before I say what I'm about to say. Claire's heart shifted. Not the way it used to shift with Alexander, that wild, reckless lurch that felt like falling off a cliff. This was different. This was tectonic, slow and deep and irreversible, like continents deciding to move. Say it, she whispered. I'm in love with you. No flourish, no poetry. No champagne glass raised to a rooftop of laughing men. Just 5 words, delivered with the raw simplicity of a man who had learned that the truth doesn't need decoration. I'm not asking for anything. I'm not expecting anything. I just couldn't stand here next to you for one more day and pretend that what I feel is professional admiration. The terrace was silent except for the wind. Claire opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Reese, you don't have to answer. Not tonight. Not ever, if that's what you need. He stepped back, giving her space the way he always gave her space, the way he had given her space from the very first dinner at the Harbor restaurant. I just wanted you to hear it from someone who means it. No bet, no deadline, no game. He turned and walked toward the stairs. Reese. He stopped. The Willamette Pinot, she said. The one you brought to the construction site that first night. What about it? You said Oregon Pinot is honest, that it shows you exactly what it is. She paused. The Grenache sky burned above them. That's what you've been doing this whole time, isn't it? Showing me exactly what you are. He didn't answer with words. He answered with the smallest, most genuine smile she had ever seen on a man's face, a smile that asked for nothing and offered everything. And then he disappeared down the stairs. Claire gripped the terrace railing. Her knuckles turned white. For 2 years, she had told herself she would never let anyone in again. She had built walls out of Michelin stars, and wine spectator columns, and ivory Louboutins, and a matte black Range Rover, and an $80 million resort. She had built walls so beautiful that people mistook them for architecture. But Reese Kensington hadn't tried to climb them, hadn't tried to knock them down. He had simply sat outside, patient and steady, until she opened the door herself. And God help her. She was opening it. Saturday, 11 a.m., the Ashford Farmers Market. Alexander saw it happen. He was buying apples he didn't want from a vendor he didn't know, pretending to examine a Honeycrisp with the intensity of a man defusing a bomb, when Claire and Reese walked past the flower stand 12 feet away. Reese said something. Claire laughed, that real laugh, the one Alexander used to coax out of her on vineyard nights, the one that made her tip her head back and close her eyes. Then Claire reached over and straightened Reese's collar. A small gesture. Effortless. The kind of thing a woman does without thinking. The kind of thing that means she has already stopped thinking of a man as separate from herself. Reese caught her hand, held it. She didn't pull away. Alexander set the apple down. The vendor said something about the price. Alexander didn't hear it. He was watching Claire's fingers laced through Reese's, watching her lean into his shoulder as they walked, watching the precise, devastating moment when the woman he loved chose someone else. Not in a grand declaration, not in a dramatic scene, but in the smallest, quietest way possible. A hand, a collar, a laugh. That was all it took. Saturday, 11:47 p.m., the Wolf Grand Hotel, penthouse. The letter arrived at midnight. Not from Claire, from Reese. Alexander found it slipped under his penthouse door, a single sheet of heavy cream stationery, handwritten in Reese's meticulous script. Alexander, I owe you this much. I am in love with Claire Davidson. I told her so last night, and I intend to spend whatever time she allows me proving that I mean it. I'm not writing to ask your permission. She is not yours to give. I'm writing because you and I were friends once, and because I believe that even broken friendships deserve the dignity of honesty. You will hate me for this. I understand. But I need you to know, I did not pursue her to hurt you. I pursued her because she is the most extraordinary woman I have ever met. And because the man I was at that yacht club table, the one who laughed, the one who stayed silent, is not the man I want to be anymore. If you ever truly loved her, then you know she deserves someone who will choose her openly, without shame, without games, without a napkin full of rules. I intend to be that someone. Reese Alexander read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it carefully, set it on the counter, walked to the panoramic window, and pressed his forehead against the glass exactly as he had done on the morning the headline broke. But this time, he didn't feel hope. He felt the cold, clarifying weight of a truth he had been running from for 2 years. He had not lost Claire to Reese Kensington. He had not lost Claire to the bet, or to Montgomery's napkin, or to the yacht club, or to time. He had lost Claire to himself, to the version of himself that stood in that lounge and called her easy, to the version that chose laughter over love, pride over honesty, performance over presence. To the 32-year-old man who raised a glass of champagne and toasted to the easiest 30 days of his life, while the best thing that ever happened to him was listening from a hallway with a breaking heart. Reese didn't steal her. Reese simply did what Alexander should have done from the very beginning. He told the truth. Alexander closed his eyes. The city glittered below, indifferent, beautiful, ongoing. Somewhere out there, Claire Davidson was falling in love with a man who deserved it. And Alexander Wolf, for the first time in his life, had to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. Not for Claire, for himself. 3 months later. December. Ashford, Connecticut. Alexander Wolf disappeared. Not from Ashford, from himself. He cancelled the quarterly Investor Gala. He stepped down from the planning committee. He stopped showing up at the Harbour restaurant, the farmer's market, the coffee shop on Elm Street, where he used to engineer coincidental run-ins with a woman who wanted nothing to do with him. He pulled back from Montgomery, from Fletcher, from every mirror that reflected the man he no longer wanted to be. For 3 months, Alexander Wolf did something he had never done in 34 years of inherited privilege and manufactured charm. He sat with the silence, and he listened to what it had to say. It said ugly things. It reminded him of every shortcut he'd ever taken, every relationship reduced to a transaction, every person measured by what they could offer, every room he walked into already calculating the fastest route to admiration. It reminded him that he had never, not once, built anything that wasn't handed to him first. The hotels were his father's. The name was his grandfather's. The penthouse, the board seat, the respect of a town that bowed to the Wolf crest. None of it was his. The only thing Alexander Wolf had ever built from scratch was a bet on a napkin. And it had destroyed the only person who made him want to be more. Late January, the Wolf Grand Hotel, 7:30 a.m. The call came from his mother. The Davidson Resort grand opening is February 14th, Eleanor Wolf said, in the tone she used for discussing hostile acquisitions and disappointing sons. Valentine's Day. The entire town is invited. The governor is attending. There will be press. I'm aware. Are you planning to go? Silence. Alexander, you are a wolf. This family does not hide. Maybe it should have, he said quietly. Maybe if we'd spent less time performing and more time being decent, I wouldn't have turned a woman's heart into a party trick. Eleanor was silent for a very long time. Then, in a voice he had never heard from her, softer, older, stripped of its usual lacquer, she said, "Then go to that opening and be decent, Alexander. It's not too late to start." February 14th. The Davidson Resort, grand opening, 7:00 p.m. The resort was breathtaking. 60 rooms cascading down the Connecticut coastline like a whisper made of glass and stone. The vineyard stretching behind it, bare in winter but already promising. rows of dormant vines waiting for spring like sentences waiting to be finished. The grand tasting room on the third floor, where Claire had stood with Rhys on the night he told her he loved her, now transformed into a cathedral of light. Floor-to-ceiling windows, candlelit tables, and a wine wall displaying 300 bottles curated by Claire herself. 400 guests filled the space. The governor shook hands. The press circled. Dominic Ashcroft delivered a speech about vision and risk that earned a standing ovation. And then Claire took the microphone. She wore white. Not bridal white, winter white. A long-sleeved dress that moved like water when she walked, simple and devastating. The kind of garment that required no jewelry because the woman wearing it was the jewel. Her blonde hair was pulled back, exposing the line of her jaw, the architecture of her collarbones, the quiet ferocity in those blue eyes that had once been so easy to underestimate. 2 years ago, she began, her voice steady as a heartbeat. I left this town with nothing. A suitcase, $1,100, and a very clear understanding of what it feels like to be someone's joke. The room went still. 400 people holding 400 breaths. I could stand here and pretend that this resort was born from ambition alone. But that would be dishonest, and I have learned, the hard way, that dishonesty is the most expensive currency there is. She paused. This resort was born from pain. From a night I spent in a hallway, listening to people laugh at the idea that I could be loved. From 3 months in an attic in Napa Valley, wondering if they were right. Alexander stood at the back of the room. He had come alone. No Montgomery. No entourage. Just a dark suit and a chest full of things he would never get to say. But pain, Claire continued, is only the seed. What grows from it depends on what you choose to water. Her eyes swept the room, and for one fraction of a second they found Alexander, not with hatred, not with indifference, with something far more complex. Recognition. The acknowledgement that he existed, that he had mattered, that the wound he inflicted had become the soil from which everything she was now had grown. I chose to water the work, the wine, the belief that I was worth more than someone else's bet. She smiled, and the room exhaled. So tonight, I'd like to raise a glass, not to revenge, not to proving anyone wrong, but to second chances. To the extraordinary people who believed in this project. She looked at Dominic, at Sarah, at her team, and to the man who taught me that honesty, given freely and without agenda, is the finest vintage of all. Her eyes found Rhys. He was standing near the wine wall, honey eyes shining, looking at her like the coastline he had traveled across the world to reach. The room erupted in applause. 8:47 p.m. The terrace. Alexander found Rhys alone on the third-floor terrace, leaning against the railing where everything between him and Claire had begun. The winter air was sharp, the stars indecent in their brightness. Kensington. Rhys turned. If he was surprised, he didn't show it. Wolf. They stood in silence for a moment. 2 men on opposite sides of a story they both knew by heart. Your letter, Alexander said. You wrote that if I ever truly loved her, I'd know she deserves someone who chooses her openly, without shame, without games. I did. Alexander reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box, midnight blue, worn at the edges, and held it out. Rhys stared at it, didn't move. It was my grandmother's, Alexander said. Margaret Wolfe. She wore it for 53 years. She told me once that a ring is just a circle, but the right circle, given to the right person, becomes a compass. His voice cracked, just barely, just enough. I was going to give it to Claire, on day 30, back when I still thought love was something you could win. Alex, I'm not giving it to you so you can think I'm noble. I'm giving it to you because my grandmother was right. This ring deserves to be a compass, and Claire deserves a man who knows where he's going. He pressed the box into Rhys's hand. That's you, Kensington. God help us both. That's you. Rhys looked at the box, looked at Alexander. and in his honey-colored eyes, something shifted. Grief and gratitude tangled together so tightly, they became the same thing. "Thank you, Alexander." "Don't thank me. Just don't ever make her feel like a footnote. She's the whole damn book." Alexander turned and walked away. Down the stairs, through the lobby, past 400 guests and a vineyard waiting for spring, and a resort built from the wreckage of his worst mistake. He stepped into the winter night. The cold hit his face like absolution, and for the first time in 2 years, Alexander Wolf felt something he hadn't earned, didn't deserve, and couldn't explain. Peace. 1 year later. October. Ashford, Connecticut. The vineyard was in bloom. Not the wild, untamed bloom of something accidental, the deliberate, breathtaking bloom of something nurtured by hands that understood patience. The Davidson Resort Vineyard had produced its first harvest that September, and Claire had overseen every cluster personally, walking the rows at dawn with soil under her fingernails and the kind of quiet joy that doesn't need an audience. It was Reese who suggested the vineyard for the wedding. Not a cathedral, not a ballroom, not the yacht club where everything had shattered 3 years earlier. The vineyard, where things grew slowly, honestly, and only if you gave them exactly what they needed. Claire said yes before he finished the sentence. October 17th, 4 p.m. The chairs were arranged between the vine rows, 200 white seats curving gently toward an arch made of reclaimed oak from the resort's original construction scaffolding. Claire had insisted on that detail. She wanted to get married under something she had built. The guests arrived in clusters. Dominic Ashcroft, in a steel gray suit, Sarah Whitfield dabbing her eyes before the ceremony even started. Leonard Calloway, who had flown in from San Francisco with his wife, and a case of the Sonoma Coast Chardonnay that started everything. Paulette, Claire's cousin, wearing a lavender dress and openly sobbing into a handkerchief while telling anyone who would listen that she always knew, that Attic Girl would become someone extraordinary. Claire's mother, Linda Davidson, sat in the front row. She was a small woman with the same blue eyes as her daughter and hands that hadn't stopped trembling since Claire called her 8 months ago and said, "Mum, I'm getting married, and I need you to know. He's a good man, a genuinely good man." Linda had paused. Then, "How do you know?" "Because he didn't try to be anything other than what he is. And what he is was enough." 4:22 p.m. Reese Kensington stood at the altar and forgot how to breathe. Claire appeared at the end of the vine row on her mother's arm, and every rehearsed thought, every steadying breath, every carefully prepared vow evaporated from his mind like morning fog off the coast. She wore ivory, not the sharp, architectural ivory of her professional armor, a softer shade, almost warm, like candlelight captured in silk. The dress was simple in the way that only truly extraordinary things can be simple. Clean lines, bare shoulders, a train that whispered across the grass behind her like a secret being told for the last time. Her blonde hair was loose, no layers, no precision, just the straight golden fall he had first seen across a restaurant table when she crossed her arms and dared him to earn her trust. She carried no bouquet. Instead, she held a single vine leaf, green and perfect and alive, because Claire Davidson did not believe in flowers that died on the altar. She believed in things that kept growing. Reese's eyes filled. He didn't wipe them. He had spent 3 years learning that vulnerability was not weakness, and he refused to hide the best feeling of his life behind a sleeve. She reached him. Linda placed Claire's hand in Reese's, and the small, trembling woman whispered, "Take care of my girl." Reese looked at Linda with those steady honey eyes. "She doesn't need taking care of, Mrs. Davidson, but I'll stand beside her for the rest of my life while she takes care of the world." Linda burst into tears. Paulette burst into louder tears. Even Dominic cleared his throat and looked aggressively at the sky. The vows. Claire spoke first. "Reese, a year ago, you stood on a terrace and told me you loved me without asking for anything in return. You didn't try to climb my walls. You didn't try to tear them down. You just sat outside and waited. with Willamette Pinot Noir and terrible jokes, and the kind of patience I didn't think existed in real life. She paused. Her voice wavered for the first time. I spent 2 years convincing myself that love was a game people played to see who broke first. And then you showed me that it doesn't have to be, that it can be quiet, that it can be honest, that it can be a man straightening wine bottles on a shelf because he noticed they were crooked and never mentioning it because he wasn't doing it for credit. He was doing it because that's who he is. She blinked. A single tear traced her cheekbone. You are the finest vintage I have ever known. Complex, honest, and better with every single day. I choose you, Reese. Not because you saved me. I saved myself. I choose you because once I was whole again, you were the person I wanted to share that wholeness with. Reese was openly crying now. He didn't care. 200 guests were witnessing the complete emotional destruction of a British man who had once been too much of a coward to speak up in a yacht club lounge, and he had never felt more proud of anything in his life. His vows were shorter. He had written pages, but standing there, holding her hands, the pages didn't matter. Claire. I was in a room once where people laughed at your heart. I said nothing, and that silence became the worst thing I ever did. His voice broke, rebuilt. I have spent every day since trying to become someone worthy of the sound of your laugh. I don't know if I've made it yet, but I will spend the rest of my life trying, not to make up for that night, but because loving you is the first honest thing I've ever done. The officiant barely got through the pronouncement before Reese kissed her, gently, completely, with the unhurried certainty of a man who understood that some things are worth waiting a lifetime for. The vineyard erupted. 8 p.m., the reception, the grand tasting room. The party was magnificent. 300 bottles from Claire's personal collection, a live jazz band, dancing that started elegant and devolved into joyful chaos by the 3rd hour. Leonard Calloway gave a toast that made everyone laugh. Dominic gave one that made everyone cry. Paulette attempted both simultaneously and achieved neither, but was cheered anyway. At 9:15 p.m., Claire stepped onto the terrace for air. The same terrace, the same railing, the same coastline, now silvered by moonlight. She sensed him before she saw him. Alexander Wolfe stood at the far end of the terrace, hands in his pockets, looking out at the ocean. He was thinner, quieter. The arrogance had been sanded away, leaving behind something she barely recognized, something that looked impossibly like humility. You came, she said. Reese invited me. A pause. I almost didn't. But I'm trying to be the kind of man who shows up for hard things now. They stood in silence. The jazz drifted up from below. You look happy, Claire. I am. Good. His voice was rough, honest, unfamiliar. That's all I came to say. You deserve everything happening in that room. The resort. The wine. Reese. He swallowed. Especially Reese. Claire studied him for a long moment. Then she did something that surprised them both. She extended her hand. Goodbye, Alexander. He looked at her hand, took it, held it for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to feel the warmth, short enough to let go. Goodbye, Claire. She walked back inside. The music swelled. Through the glass, Alexander watched her find Reese on the dance floor, watched Reese pull her close, watched them sway together under the lights of a building she had raised from nothing. Alexander smiled. It hurt. It was real. He turned, walked down the stairs, and stepped into the October night. The vineyard stretched around him, dark and quiet, and full of things still growing. Claire and Reese Kensington settled permanently in Ashford. The Davidson Resort earned its first Michelin star within 18 months and became the premier wine destination on the East Coast. Their daughter, born the following autumn, was named Margaret, after a grandmother she would never meet and a midnight blue ring she would one day wear. Alexander Wolfe sold the penthouse. He spent a year traveling, not the performative kind, but the searching kind. He wrote Claire one final letter, 18 months after the wedding. It contained no apology, no confession, no request. Just one line. "Thank you for teaching me that love is not a game. I'm finally learning the rules." Claire read it on the terrace at sunset. She folded it carefully, slid it into the pages of the World Atlas of Wine, and went inside to have dinner with her husband. The napkin, Montgomery's napkin, with the rules of the bet, was never found. Some say Alexander burned it. Others say he kept it, tucked inside a drawer, as a reminder of the man he never wanted to be again. But Claire Davidson Kensington didn't think about napkins anymore. She thought about vineyards, about patience, about a man with honey-colored eyes who sat outside her walls with a bottle of Oregon Pinot and waited, simply waited, until she was ready to let him in. And on clear autumn nights, when the Connecticut coast glittered beneath the stars and the vineyard hummed with the quiet music of things still becoming, Claire would pour 2 glasses of that same Willamette Valley Pinot Noir, one for herself, one for Reese, and they would stand on their terrace shoulder to shoulder, watching the vines grow. No bets, no games, no walls, just the steady, honest, extraordinary work of love. Finn.